Time now for Fantasy Forecast Central Radio. Here's Nick Slegel and Brian Dezelske.
Pro Football Central Radio exclusive.
Welcome to another edition of Fantasy Forecast Central Radio here on Pro Football Central Radio. My name is Nick Slegel. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Brian Dezelske. Brian, how's it going today, buddy?
It's going great, man. I'm stoked for today's show. Football is in the air. Football has been played, albeit the first preseason game of the year. But I don't care. I love football season, man. I can't wait for the start of the regular season.
Yeah, I'm with you. We were all glued to Miami, Dallas this weekend, which is pretty strange because those are two teams I could normally not care at all to watch. And I was totally glued to every single snap, even when, the practice guys were in there. But, we have another huge show today. We have Chad Scott from Dynasty League Football stopping by to talk some Dynasty IDP with us. Jim Day from FantasyTaz.com is going to stop by and talk about all of the awesome, crazy leagues he does every year. This guy's just insane. He's pretty much a legend in the fantasy community, so it's going to be really cool to talk to him. We're going to cover a little bit of, some fantasy-related news from around the league, and then we'll get into talking a little bit about handcuffing players. Some people feel like this is a really good strategy for them. Works for some people it doesn't, so we're going to talk about that a little bit. And right now, let's get right into the news. So like we just said, we had that Hall of Fame game this weekend, Miami at Dallas. We had a lot of starters sit out, and even the starters that did play didn't play a lot. So do you think, was there anything fantasy-wise we could take away from that game, or was it just, we should just be excited football is back and leave it at that?
Well, obviously, everyone's excited that football was back. I think that was the main thing for fans. For the two teams, I think it was more a chance to get the guys who are, your late round picks, your not so named players, if you call them that, to get them on the field, get them reps, see what they got out of those players. It was unfortunate that you have names like Mike Wallace, Tony Romo, and et cetera out there on the sideline and not playing, but we got to see the backups. And I think what we got to see from Dallas was Lance Dunbar looks like he's going to be the backup. So if you're looking at handcuffing an injury-prone DeMarco Murray, Lance Dunbar is going to be your guy, at least from my perspective. As far as Miami, I know a lot of people were tweeting during the game, right, especially right after the first play of the Dolphins had when Lamar Miller coughed it up. But I don't take anything away from that. I think Lamar Miller is still going to be the guy. We all know Daniel Thomas. He is what he is. He's a short yardage back, third down back at best. How about you? What did you see in that game?
Yeah, I'm with you. With Dallas, I was really looking at all of the running backs, Dunbar, Randall, and Tanner. And I think they all performed well. I think you're right. Dunbar will probably be that guy to go right behind Murray. But they all looked good, and it's one of those things to keep an eye on because you could be looking at maybe one or two of these guys stepping up if DeMarco Murray does go down again, which I'm always counting on. And with Miami, it was one of those things where the offensive line played very poorly. The fumble was not on Lamar Miller at all, who, yes, has had some fumble issues, in the red zone, but that handoff hit him like 4 feet below where his arms were. So that was more on Tannehill than anything. And, a lot of people wanted to knock Tannehill's performance, but you have to realize Dustin Keller, Brian Hartline, and Mike Wallace were all on the sidelines. So he was throwing to some inexperienced runners. A couple of those passes behind the receivers weren't his fault. You could tell the receiver wasn't running the correct route. So overall, for Miami's offense, it needs some work, but I really took nothing away from it besides the fact that Daniel Thomas just sucks. 4 carries for 5 yards. Just, I'm really more interested in seeing what Mike Gillislee can do, and I'm pretty sure he's going to end up with the number 2 job in the end.
I was looking to see who would possibly step up. I know it's just the first game, and that's probably not something it would just jump out at us right away. But I was looking to see who would step up and kind of give us an idea, I guess, if you will, who the third receiver would be for the Cowboys. Is it going to be Anthony Armstrong? Is it going to be Terrence Williams? Last year it was Kevin Ogletree, who for the first couple weeks of the season looked like he was going to be the guy who would replace Laurent Robinson from a year ago, who had 11 touchdowns as the number 3 slot guy. But I didn't see anything from either one of those guys that led me to believe that they would be the surefire number 3 guy.
No, I'm with you, and I was very high on Terrence Williams coming out of Baylor. Just one of the most experienced, polished route runners coming out of the college ranks last year. So I was excited to see what he could do. And you're right, I was a little let down, but I'm guessing maybe this had more to do with Kyle Orton than anything. Who was, don't get me wrong, we probably had the 2 best backup quarterbacks in NFL play on Sunday, but he's still Kyle Orton. Once Tony Romo was out there, it builds a rapport. I think Williams will step up and do a pretty good job, but it's a little too early to tell. Even from the IDP side, though, with most of their quote-unquote stars out, Dallas still did. Their defense was quite impressive, and there's a few players there to keep your eyes on that could be really, really nice, late-round dynasty adds for the future.
Yeah, Devontae Holloman showed some speed on an interception taken at about 75 yards to the house, outrunning Matt Moore at the end there. Yeah, they do have some talent in the depth there at the linebacker position. Sean Lee, like you said, some notable starters weren't playing. Sean Lee didn't play. He was sidelined.
Anthony Spencer didn't play.
Yeah, Anthony Spencer. Yeah, he's another one that didn't play. So yeah, they did look good with backups playing the majority of the game. So they did look promising for the Cowboys on the defensive side of the ball for sure.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So let's turn the page here a little bit to the Jets quick. Chris Ivory is hampered by a hamstring injury. For me, I'm not really surprised by this. This is a guy that I've said could never shoulder the load as the primary back. Do you think this is just a sign of things that come in New York? Maybe fantasy owners should stop valuing him quite so high, because this is a guy we saw after he got traded from New Orleans. His ADP went way up. And do you think it kind of ballooned a little too much and now the bubble's sort of popping?
Yeah, fantasy experts love it when backup running backs get traded to new teams and are penciled in as the immediate starter. Everybody starts anticipating what round he'd be a good pick, and if he's going to be an RB2 or a high-end RB3. What are we going to get from this guy now that he's the main guy? It looks like Rex Ryan is actually kind of frustrated right now. He hasn't practiced in close to a week. And, injuries have been a part of this guy's past back in, when he was with the Saints. He's clearly, in my opinion, and, correct me if I'm wrong, but he's clearly the best running back they have on the team.
Which says a lot about their team.
Right. And it might even be to the point where he may be the best offensive weapon they have on the team. Aside from, I think down the road, Geno Smith is going to be, the guy playing quarterback. He'd probably be the best offensive weapon on that team with his legs, his ability to run. But, I don't put a lot of stock into Santonio Holmes. I know he's probably their best wide receiver right now, but you have Stephen Hill, who was a first rounder from last year. He's going to look, Jets fans are going to look to see, what kind of improvement he's made from last year to this year. But I think Chris Ivory right now is probably their best offensive weapon, and he hasn't practiced in over a week. I can't imagine Rex Ryan being too happy with where he's at with his offense right now.
Yeah, I'm totally with you there. This is a guy that I've been steering clear of for a while, and it more cemented that feeling for me for anything. But we actually have Chad Scott on the line right now, so we're going to go a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk to Chad Scott from Dynasty League Football here on Fantasy Forecast Central Radio.
Cigar fans, check out fifthdowncigar.com and enter the coupon code PFC to get 10% off your order. Lots of nice high-end cigars. That's fifthdowncigar.com. Enter the code PFC for 10% off your order.
And we're back on Fantasy Forecast Central Radio. So, like I said, right now we have Chad Scott from DynastyLeagueFootball.com, FFOasis.com, and TheLateRoundQB.com. Chad, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. So let's dive right in here. For some of our listeners that aren't quite sure what the difference between a keeper and a dynasty league is, can you sort of walk us through what the difference is there?
Yeah, the main difference is with keepers, usually you keep, a set amount of players, whether it be 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever the league kind of has. But for dynasty, you're basically carrying over your entire team year to year, pending any waivers or trades you do. You're keeping a 25-man roster team or more for as many years as you can, basically.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where you notice a lot of redraft players after they've been playing redraft for a long time sort of get bored with it and make the jump towards dynasty. How long have you been playing dynasty now?
Just a couple of years, and what I like about dynasty is it takes a lot of the luck out of the redraft leagues, because anybody can basically win a redraft no matter what your team is. You just have to get hot for those last 3 weeks of the season. With the dynasty, it takes a lot of luck out of it, and you're building a team that's ready to compete for years and years. So I think that's what I like most about it. That, and you can talk football 24/7, trade whenever you want. Yeah, it's just a much better setup for me.
Chad, for the guy who say gets bored with same players year after year after year, what do you say to that guy who's maybe hesitant to play in dynasty? And I'm just going to throw it out there. I haven't played a dynasty league before, and I kind of feel like I might be that guy. Kind of sell me on why I should jump into a dynasty league and play it for an extended period of time, 5 years, 10 years plus.
Well, I think the number one thing would be you have to find a league that's going to be active and competitive. If you can do it with your friends, that's probably your best bet. So you guys kind of learn together. Second thing, if you love football and you love talking fantasy football, all year long, dynasty is kind of where it's at, because there's never an off season. You're always researching somebody. You're always trying to make trades and better your team. And like I said, it's really fun to target the youngsters in dynasty startup drafts, and in the 12th, 13th, 14th round, and then see them end up being a top 20 pick maybe next year or the year after that. So it's really fun to kind of gauge your eye for talent and kind of what's to come.
Now, when playing dynasty, do you prefer standard defensive special teams, or do you prefer IDP?
Honestly, this is my first year for IDP, and I've drafted, I think, four startups with IDPs, and I really enjoyed the draft. I think it makes the draft a lot. It makes it longer, and it's more fun trying to figure out where each defensive player goes. That's the tricky part, for me anyway. And I like IDPs because it's more scoring. You're rooting for more people than just a team defense. And again, team defenses can be really fluky. You get a 30-point game from a team defense, and you basically are going to win that week in a head-to-head. With IDPs, it's going to kind of even the playing field as long as everybody kind of knows what they're doing in terms of finding IDPs. So I think I'm going to like IDP a lot more, but I'm going to have to get back to you on whether I do or not, for sure.
No worries there.
So I don't know if you'll be able to answer this one yet then, but when it comes to ADP, on offense, people will stream quarterbacks, tight ends, defenses, even in normal standard leagues. Are there any positions you've looked at streaming as far as IDP goes, or are you still trying to feel that whole thing out?
Yeah, I think pretty much just from what I'm gathering, I'm going to be streaming my cornerbacks and or safeties, just based on maybe quarterbacks they're playing, or maybe I think New Orleans will dominate this team, so this other team will have to pass more. Therefore, I'm going to stream the opponent's, DB or the Saints DBs sort of thing. I don't really know yet how it's going to work, but that's kind of my going at right now. So who knows?
That's not a bad strategy. I do sort of. I guess I wouldn't call it streaming, but in the last couple of years, there's been such an influx of talented rookie corners and safeties that end up getting significant playing time or starting right away. I wouldn't say I stream either position, but they're both positions that I really don't address until 30th round on in big IDP setup, startup drafts, because you can land guys like Darius Slay from Detroit. He's going to be a starter all season, probably put up pretty big numbers, and nobody's thinking about him. Jonathan Banks in Tampa, Desmond Trufant in Atlanta, the list goes on and on. So I think you're barking up the right tree there. It seems like a pretty good strategy. The one that I always go for in IDP is defensive tackles, because they usually don't hold a ton of value, and you usually only need one starter. So I'll generally just grab a rookie, like a Jonathan Hankins at the very end of the draft, and then during his bye week, I'll probably just cut him and pick up someone else, like John Jenkins from New Orleans. So there's a lot of options there for streaming as well. And this sort of fits right into – oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, and I was going to say you're dead on with the rookies and as far as secondary goes, because a guy I have on just about every team that I get late is the Honey Badger, and I think if your league counts like punt returns and kick returns for touchdowns, and you can get a guy like Patrick Peterson or Honey Badger or a defensive guy that does that, I think that's kind of icing on the cake.
Yeah, I agree definitely. And you're I'm right there with you on Honey Badger. I think I have him in almost every one of my IDP leagues this year that I started up this year. He's a good guy to grab. He's because they're gonna rotate him around between safety and corner. Yeah, definitely. So as far as IDP players go, then do you sometimes I see people using like a 6th round pick on JJ Watt. Do you think it's worth it to go that high for an ADP player or IDP player? Sorry. Or can you sit back and wait and still build like a winning defense much later while you address your offense first?
Yeah, I think you can wait on IDPs for the most part. I've been in a couple drafts where Watt's gone in the late third and early fourth. And that's just a little too much for me, even though he's dominant at the position, and he's almost like if there was a Jimmy Graham and no Rob Gronkowski. It's like that kind of dominance over that position right now. So I can understand why somebody would take him, but I can't do that. I'm too offensive minded. I think you can IDPs. They people come out of nowhere in IDPs that I've read and that I've kind of done my research on. So I usually start looking at IDPs maybe in the 7th round if I can get a Bobby Wagner or maybe a JPP. I'll take them in the 7th, and then just kind of feel out the draft from there. Kuechly is another guy I'd probably draft a little earlier, maybe the 6th. But yeah, that's other than Watt and Kuechly, I'll never own them because I don't ever draft that early on those guys. So I wouldn't personally, but it's everybody's preference,
All right, Chad. Let's talk dynasty sleepers. You got 3 guys in mind that you think are going to have a big impact here in 2014, offense or defense?
Yeah. So I got the question. You want 2014, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're thinking like next season. I like Chris Harper. If anybody follows me on Twitter,
of course
they know. And plus, I'm a huge Seahawk homer, so there's that. No, I just like I like his situation. He's a big guy, very physical. He's like 230 pounds and 6'3" or 6'4". Just built for that kind of offense. I think come 2014, Sidney Rice and his huge contract may be out the door, giving him an opportunity, whether or not they sign Golden Tate or re-sign Golden Tate. It's probably a little dependent on that, but I think he starts seeing some playing time this year and then looking for a sort of a breakout in 2014. So I like Chris Harper. Another guy that I like in 2014 is, and a lot of people are starting to like him for 2013, so take it for what you will. But I like Stephen Hill. I like his talent. I'm not sure if the quarterback situation can warrant a true breakout year for him this season, but he's got all the measurables I like in a wide receiver. He's a big guy. He's fast. He just needs to concentrate a little more on the ball, obviously. But I think once Geno Smith has a year under his belt, Stephen Hill, will have a nice year in 2014. And to throw a running back out there, I'm going to say Dennis Johnson in Houston.
Really?
Quick little bat. Just because it depends. Foster's health, whether or not Tate leaves. I think there might be an opening in 2014 for him. I think he could end up being Foster's backup in 2014 if Tate leaves. And then, and Foster's breaking down himself. The calf injury's been lingering. I think it's just going to – I still like him for 2014, but at some point you're going to have to start looking at who's going to end up getting the carries in Houston in a Kubiak system. So, Dennis Johnson is my guy. There's Sierra Wood there, and help me out, Nick, with the other guy. I can't think of his name, but Ray Graham. Ray Graham.
Yeah, Ray Graham.
I really like Dennis Johnson's playmaking ability. He's had a great camp. He's got to make the team this year first, and I think he will. But I think he'll be a contributor on special teams. But it's a long shot, but he's a guy that I'm kind of stashing on a lot of my dynasty leagues right now.
Okay, I know you're a Seattle homer, and you mentioned the Seahawks. You must be crying in your sleep right now due to the Percy Harvin injury. Me personally, I'm a Minnesota guy, native Viking fan, so I'm kind of laughing over here. What do you think we're going to see out of Percy Harvin when he comes back this year?
Honestly, I kind of hope he doesn't come back this year. I'd rather him just rehab and be fine. Like, put him in a padded room with pads on top of pads, and don't let him hurt himself, and be healthy for 2014. I loved when we got him. Don't get me wrong. I love the draft. I love the trade. I loved what he could maybe bring to this offense. But the truth is, we showed that we don't need him. He would have been kind of icing on the cake, and would have been a little easier to. It would have given us an easier road maybe to the playoffs. But I don't think this offense was ever going to be built around him. It's always going to be built around a running game and what Russell Wilson does in the passing game. So, I cried. I had a good shower cry for 3-4 days, and then I kind of moved on. I'm really on the Golden Tate bandwagon now. So,
yes,
yeah,
I am.
I might cry again.
Yes,
Bring it up.
absolutely. Loving Golden Tate this year.
Yeah, and Chad,
he's getting pretty cheap.
I've been saying this whole time that Seattle didn't really need Percy Harvin. They were, a play away from the NFC Championship game without him, and didn't really lose anything on that offense. So he was kind of just the topping. So I think they'll be just fine. But you're right. I think it would be best for Percy to just sit out the whole season and just come back next year strong.
Yeah, I mean, unless he feels he's 100% healthy, there's really no need. If we're doing well, why add somebody that can potentially, mess up something that's going good? I don't know. I mean, it's hard to tell. Of course, you want Percy in your offense, but I'm looking more long term as a Seahawks fan and as a Percy owner in Dynasty. So yeah, I'd rather him just sit out as well.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. So I think that's all we got for you today, Chad. Thank you so much for coming on. Do you want to take a quick second to tell everyone where they can find your work on the internet and where they can find you on social media?
Yeah, man. Thanks, guys, for having me on. I really appreciate it. So yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Chad_Scott13. As the guy said before, I write for DynastyLeagueFootball.com. You can also find my writings at FFOasis.com and LateRoundQB.com.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Chad.
Thank you, guys.
Football fans, looking to get healthy this year? Now is the time, and I have the perfect place for you. Save 10% at onit.com/football radio. Exclusive PFC radio listeners save 10% off their order. That's onit.com, ONNIT.com/football radio.
And welcome back to Fantasy Forecast Central Radio. So, handcuffing, Brian, is this, a concept us in the quote-unquote expert community discuss a lot. Basically, the term handcuffing comes from the practice of drafting, 2 to 3 running backs from the same team, or 1 or 2 receivers from the same team, starting them all with the intention that between the 2 or 3 of them, they're going to get you all the points that you need. People are very interested in doing that this year with, the St. Louis Rams running backs, because we don't know who the lead guy is going to be. We don't really know how it's going to shake out. There's 3 guys, all competing for the job. So is this a viable strategy for success, do you think?
Well, in the situation that you just mentioned with the St. Louis Rams, I think it is. You're gonna get one of the 2 running backs, if not both of them, that are going. I mean, say you get Darrell Richardson and I can't remember the name of the backup, Zach Stacy. Say you get those 2 guys, and they're gonna split carries for the most part. I think you can win doing that. I'm not sure that getting a guy like Toby Gerhart or Ben Tate, I struggle with this one. I lean towards not getting the handcuff just because, you take a look at last year, Toby Gerhart carried the ball less than 100 times. He barely touched it at all. And a lot of it, well, actually the vast majority of it had to do with that San Francisco game where he fumbled the ball 3 times in a backup role. He fumbled it 3 times. So I think that pretty much, sealed his fate last year. But you see Ben Tate, the year before he had a pretty good season because Arian Foster was, beat up with injuries. But, last year that wasn't so much the case. And I think it's just, to me personally, it is a little bit of a wasted roster spot when there's other guys out there on the wire that you could have on in your line on your bench and plug and play if needed. But like you said, in the St. Louis Rams is a great example of a place where of a team where drafting handcuffs makes a lot of sense, because you don't know from week to week who's going to be the guy who's going to get 15 plus carries. Now I present to you the Tennessee Titans. What do you think about that situation? They brought in Sean Green, who's a 1,000-yard rusher from last year. What do you think his role is going to be with the Tennessee Titans? Is he a viable handcuff in your opinion?
But it's one of those things where I think they're aiming for what they wanted to do with Lendale White back in the day. That whole Thunder Lightning combo attack. But at this point, it's really hard to understand or to try to project what exactly Sean Green is going to do in that offense. I think it'll depend on how effective, CJ2K is, how effective the passing game is. There's too many factors right now. I would avoid that handcuff, to be honest. But for me, I avoid all handcuffs. They kind of scare me. And I agree with you. I think the idea of handcuffing St. Louis's running backs this year is not a bad idea at all. But at the same time, I would rather roster, an Alfred Morris and a Stephen Ridley combo, or anyone in Stephen Ridley, like 2 better running backs, than have to worry about those 2 combining for just running back 1 numbers. You know what I mean? So instead of getting 2 running backs on your roster that are going to put up, running back 1 or high-end running back 2 numbers, you have 2 running back 3s that will combine for hopefully low-end running back 1 numbers. And I think it's just you're limiting your roster a little bit when you go the handcuff route. But like with the MFL 10s and best ball scoring format, I think that's where handcuffing can really pay off, because you draft a 25-man roster and then you never touch a lineup. You never have to worry about who to start, who to sit, absolutely, and they just take the best scores. So I think that's where I would be really interested in handcuffing, and probably something I'm going to start trying pretty soon with the MFL 10s. because I've never really played a lot of best ball before this year, but it's a different format entirely because you really don't have to look at matchups, anything. You draft a roster of talented, potential impact players in fantasy football, and then you just hope for the best. So I think for me, that's where I would be much more interested in handcuffing. I think it would really pay off.
Yeah. Now, what are your thoughts about double dipping, getting the quarterback and the number one wide receiver from a particular team? I myself, I'm not a big fan of it. Personally, I feel like you're putting too much emphasis on the good fortunes of one particular football team on your own fantasy team. You get a combination like Matt Ryan and Julio Jones. Uh, great, great quarterback, great receiver. They're both going to put up good fantasy numbers over the course of the year. But if the Falcons struggle in a given week, your fantasy team is going to struggle because neither one of those guys are going to be putting up good numbers for you. I try to stay away from that. How about you? Is that something you do every once in a while? I know there's guys out there that you probably roll the dice a little bit, say like a Peyton Manning and a Demaryius Thomas, but I generally try to stay away from that. What's your thoughts?
Well, it's really hard for me because generally I, prescribe to the late round or subscribe, sorry, to the late round QB theory. So I generally, if I wanted to do that, I'd end up double dipping some pretty bad wide receivers in the end. So it's one of those things where, if I drafted, it's hard to say who has like a true number one. Like maybe Tannehill and Mike Williams, I'd be semi interested in that one. But beyond that, there's not. Aaron Rodgers has three receivers he's going to throw to regularly. It's hard to say. It's hard to say if that's going to be the matchup this year. He could end up throwing a lot more to Jordy and James Jones, and then that's going to cut down on Cobb. And the same goes with Atlanta, really. Julio Jones is great, but you have to remember Roddy White is still a wide receiver one also. Those two went back and forth every week last season. One would be the top fantasy performer, the other one would be 5 points behind, and then they'd switch the next week. So going back to the handcuffing for a minute, there's a pair of wide receivers I'll handcuff all day, no problem. Because they're both fringe, they're both going to put up wide receiver one numbers every other week, and you start them both all the time, you're going to get awesome wide receiver numbers there. But as far as double dipping goes, I don't really think there's anyone that I would touch that way. It's too much of a gamble. Even if you went Peyton Manning and like Wes Welker, that's going to work out great this year, maybe. But beyond that, like especially in Dynasty, you don't want to touch that,
Yeah, right. And I'm glad you mentioned the Green Bay Packers. I want to touch on them for a little bit. We were talking injuries earlier in the show, and Brian Bulaga went out with a torn ACL over the weekend here. I have a feeling that injury is going to play a significant role in the wide receiver game as far as fantasy is concerned. I feel there's going to be a lot more quick throws. And I think that's going to favor Randall Cobb a lot more, and I think that's going to hurt Jordy Nelson, who's generally the deep guy, who's going to see less balls downfield now. What are your thoughts being over there in Wisconsin? What are you hearing?
Really, I don't think fantasy owners should be that concerned. I don't know if a lot of people know, but Rodgers was actually sacked second in the league highest with 53 sacks last year. Bulaga was never a good left tackle, and they played most of the season without him at right tackle last year. Marshall Newhouse or David Bakhtiari, the rookie, are going to come in and play left tackle. The offensive line at worst is going to be about what it was last year. We saw tons of deep passes still last year, so I don't think it'll be too much different. But I think the bigger concern is Jordy Nelson's health. Going down, he had knee surgery on Monday. He's hoping to play by the season opener. He might miss a game or two. And he's always had injuries, been hampered by an injury, miss a game or two through the season. So I'd be a little more worried about the health of the Green Bay receivers than how the offensive line health is going to affect them, really.
Okay. That was my immediate thought was when I saw that injury. And I know that, Bulaga played a lot on the right side last year, which actually I believe he missed 9 games last year, so he didn't really play all that much. But my immediate thought was like, okay, they're going to shorten up the passing game, and I think that's going to favor Randall Cobb. But I guess we'll have to find out here. We'll see here.
Yeah,
Down
if
the road.
anything, it'll be one of those things where maybe McCarthy will finally just lean on the run game a little heavier than he ever has, just to open up the downfield passing. But yeah, so as far as double dipping goes, I think that's something I stay away from always. It's just something I don't want to mess with. I guess in theory, if I could land Aaron Rodgers and Randall Cobb, I'd go for it, but I'm missing out on too many running backs if I try to land that combo, in the first and second or first and third round. So with that said, I think we're going to go to break right now. When we come back, we're going to have Jim Day from FantasyTaz.com on.
Football fans, check out ProFootballCentral.com for all the latest NFL news and analysis. Also, check out the very popular Pro Football Central radio network for awesome NFL talk around the league. Go to ProFootballCentral.com. ProFootballCentral.com.
And welcome back to Fantasy Forecast Central Radio. We're joined now by Jim Day, the owner of FantasyTaz.com and the undisputed fantasy football draft master. Jim, thank you so much for coming on. How's it going?
Hey, it's going great, man. Thanks for having me on. Always great to talk fantasy football.
Oh, of course. So you and I were talking yesterday sort of about all of the different leagues you're in, and you mentioned to me that you do 150 draft masters per year. I've taken place in a few of them, and they're a pretty cool concept. But for everyone that doesn't know, can you explain exactly what a draft master is? And then I was wondering, is this something you came up with, or is it just something you've perfected?
Okay. Well, draft master basically is what they call a best ball league, and really what it is it's just a draft. You go in and you draft your team, and then you're done. Once the draft is over, you don't have to do anything else. You don't set lineups. You don't do waivers. There's no trades. It's just how well did you draft. And the whole thing is really, it's a little different than a mock draft, because a mock draft, you're done, you don't never look at it again. With the Draft Master Series, they keep score all year long, so you're able to follow how each draft did. It's been around for a while. Actually, Emil Kadlik is the one who actually started these quite a few years ago. But ever since my fantasy league started offering them as a free league, I've just gone nuts setting them up, and we get more and more people involved every time, and it's really gotten pretty well. And the 150 draft master thing, that's an estimation. It's actually probably a little bit on the low side, because I've probably done almost about 170 already this year.
Wow, that's just crazy. Like I've joined 9 new leagues this year, and I thought I was like blowing my mind. So it's incredible you can do that many. And speaking of that, you also said besides the Draft Masters, you're in about 70 normal leagues a year. How
well,
do
I really wouldn't call them normal.
Well, yeah.
I'd say that about half of them what you would consider normal. The other half, not so much. Definitely a lot of deep roster dynasty leagues, 53-man, 48-man dynasty leagues. I have a few
53-man league.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Oh, yeah, I'm in a couple of those. Those are fun.
Wow.
But what do you do, Jim, when you do that many leagues? What do you do to keep them all straight?
I have a giant spreadsheet with every league, just literally locked into MFL for any changes. I can pretty much open up the spreadsheet at any time, type in a player name, find out exactly which leagues they're in if I need to make a quick switch. It's something I've been working on for a while.
Wow, that's probably a good idea. So what, you said you're in a lot of deep leagues like that. What is your favorite format of league, like scoring and, redraft versus fantasy or dynasty?
Well, I'm definitely PPR guy. If we want to start with the basics, I don't play non-PPR very much at all. Maybe a few long-standing leagues, but don't enjoy it as much. I like the PPR factor, that it gives other players a chance to actually score you points as opposed to just the guys that scored touchdowns. I'm really not a big fan. So I definitely like that. I like anything and everything that goes beyond the norm. I don't want fantasy owners when they draft, I don't want them to feel comfortable. I want them to have to think outside the box and get a little anxious when their pick comes up. And, if you're just sitting there playing in a normal 12-team, 16, 18-round draft, it outside of like the 2 or 3 spots that players might move around in the draft, it's all pretty standard. I try to get away from that. I want to do different things. We did a Draft Master not too long ago. It was Draft Master 100, where we actually had 22 teams drafting 20 roster spots. Now, that was pretty much a different draft.
Wow, I bet.
And not only that, but it was all experts. It was all fantasy football guys from Twitter all over the place. So it was knowledgeable people at the same time.
Now, with the insane amount of leagues that you've been in over the years, what are some of the most interesting leagues you've been a part of?
Okay. Well, I started one back in 2007 called Utter Chaos, which is pretty much exactly that. The scoring is different for every single position. It's not standardized in any way. And basically, if you look at the top 50 performers from any year, it could be any position from defensive tackle to quarterback. They all range in that same range based on the scoring we put together. Plus the different roster requirements. You have to start 2 quarterbacks. You only start 1 running back. You can only roster 3 running backs. You have to start 5 wide receivers. It really brings a lot of different play into it. And the defensive side is quite extensive as well. So I really like that. There's another one that Gene Bramall started called the IOP League, which is pretty much along those same lines. Anything that makes it different outside the norm is what I like.
So in the Utter Chaos League, then, do you guys put a lot more emphasis on defensive points? Because I feel like a lot of dynasty leagues I do, they have such standard boring scoring for the defense that you can just draft them all in the last 10 rounds because they don't really matter all that much.
Yes, and exactly why I hate that. If I'm starting a league, if I'm a commissioner of a league, you can guarantee if we're drafting, even if it's just team defenses, the scoring is going to be changed enough that those team defenses are going to matter.
Now, I know you mentioned you play Dynasty. I'm curious, what's the longest tenured league that you're in currently?
The actual first league that I started playing in is still around, and that was from 1991.
That
wow.
Is awesome.
That was my first league, and we still have 11 out of the original 12 owners in the league.
Wow, is that so? I'm not that old. I came around fantasy football when it was already on the internet, and so I've never played it any other way. Like, how did you guys go about keeping track of scoring and things like that, way back in the day like that?
You waited till Monday's USA Today came out, and then you went in and you took all the stats by hand.
Wow, I can't even imagine doing all of that work by hand. That's amazing.
Yeah, I was the idiot doing all that work by hand. Yeah.
That's so impressive. My longest tenure league was 3 years, and you've been in one since I was 4 years old. That's so impressive.
Wow, thanks for making me feel old.
Sorry,
Jim, have you thought of getting a secretary or a personal assistant to help take care of all your fantasy leagues?
Yeah, I've put it out there a few times, but all I keep getting is these ugly fat white guys.
I'm pretty sure I was one of them. But Jim, there was something I wanted to talk about that happened a couple months ago that just really impressed me and took off so quickly. A friend of the fantasy football community, fellow writer, Lad Davies, for people that don't know, his daughter Maddie has type 1 diabetes, which is pretty scary for little kids. And they were trying, to raise money to get a diabetic alert dog, which are insanely expensive. Just blew my mind when I found out how much those dogs cost. And I know you sort of took up the cause to help raise money through fantasy football leagues and everything, and it took off like wildfire. I was so impressed with everything that you did for the FF Help Maddie cause, and we ended up raising over $12,000 in a week and a half.
Well, actually 8 days, and you got one thing wrong. The cause took me up. I didn't take the cause up. I put a note out there to see if I could start 1 or 2 leagues to try and put a little dent into it, and then it said, okay, well, come along for the avalanche, and it just carried me along for 8 days of just craziness. We just got everybody involved, and I couldn't believe the people that were getting involved, and so many people helping to do it. It was an awesome thing to see everybody just come together like that. So, I was a little part of what turned out to be a huge wheel.
Yeah, it was such a great movement. And I know last time I had heard there was 50 plus fantasy leagues with portions of the proceeds going to the cause. How many did we end up with total?
No, 15.
Oh, only 15 . Okay, I
yeah, okay, 15.
That's still a very impressive amount of leagues.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it actually worked out to be 16 because somebody took a whole team for their site and with their people. So it ended up being 16 total, which was really cool.
Wow, that's awesome.
Wow, that's fantastic.
I think that's all we have for you today, Jim. I just want to say thank you so much for coming on. It was awesome talking to you and getting a little insight into, the bigger, wider world of fantasy football. Do you want to take a second to tell everyone about your podcast, where they can find you on Twitter, etc.?
Sure, absolutely. Of course, Twitter is the easiest. You can find me at FantasyTaz. Along those same lines, you can go to FantasyTaz.com, bringing in all kinds of new writers this year. We got some new product going up really soon, and it's all free all the time, so definitely take a look at it. And my podcast every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock is Fantasy Taz on Tap, bringing a couple of people where, basically act like we're sitting in a bar talking fantasy football. It can get loud, it can get rowdy, who knows what's going to happen. And then Friday night, I'm joined by the FX Magic Man, Micah James, and Dish Adams in the Fantasy Football Power Hour every Friday night at 7, again on BTR, Blog Talk Radio. But you can find these all just by following me on Twitter at FantasyTaz.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much, Jim, for coming on. We look forward to having you on again in the future.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. Have a good rest of your show.
And that's it for another edition of Fantasy Forecast Central Radio. We want to thank Chad Scott for coming on talking Dynasty, Jim Day from FantasyTaz.com for coming on talking about all the insane league season, and thanks everybody for listening. We will see you next Tuesday.
This has been a presentation of the Pro Football Central Network. For news, blogs, highlights, and more, log on to ProFootballCentral.com.